Now in microscopy, medicine, right, we have pretty much the same problem, right? We have tissues that are really truly, right? And we can do the simple solution, right? We just take a knife and chop off all the obstructing tissues, which is histology, right? People do it for years. But you can't do it in vivo in many cases, right? You can't do it, you know, and the price for it is basically very huge, right? So people started to think and adopted some of these methods. And it's ongoing research for, I would say, a couple of decades now, very successful. The solution that I found was actually, it's based on quite fascinating work of Mosk from the University of Twente. And this was the solution that I found to my very small vessel beam problem, but turned out to be much more important and pretty much defined the rest of my career. So if you like fantasy, this is from a movie of Terry Pratchett, who died of Alzheimer some months ago, unfortunately, so there won't be any other book. Well, the citizens of this work use these huge semaphores, which are like binary displays of segments that you can independently turn on or off, right? And the citizens of this world use them to communicate. And I'm using exactly the same idea for correcting the aberrations. I'll try to explain how it works. So we use these spatial light modulators. This is how they look like. These are basically LCD displays, the same thing you have in your phone or tablet or screen. The only difference is that they don't manipulate, they don't modulate the amplitude. They don't kill the light, but they change the phase. So light has a phase, and you can kick it forward or backwards really good, right? And you can imprint and generate and engine any waveform of light that you want. Right? So here's the idea. Right? This is my optical system. Let's make it just very simple, one lens. Right? And this is a laser beam constructed by a series of rays. And when everything works perfectly, all of the rays will meet in one point, right, and give me the highest possible intensity. Now I need to introduce the concept of waves, because otherwise I won't be able to explain the interference principles. So you can see that all these waves will come to the same point in phase. And they maximize because they add up constructively, as we say, right? But if I have aberrations, this is not fulfilled, and I can have the opposite extreme. I can have the antiphase, right? And if two waves come in the point in antiphase, they cancel each other. And this is what you don't want, because it costs you an energy, right? So this is something that you have to eliminate. So what can we do? We can take the semaphore here, and you can see barely see, but there are these windows that I can independently turn on or off. Right? And the first thing, I sort of block the beam, and I will only allow one of them to go through the system. Ideally one in the middle. Let's make it one in the middle. So I open the door, one goes through the system, and then I need to define the position where I want the light to be focused, and I have to place there some kind of intensity detector. It can be, for example, fluorescent particle. That's the best one if you want to do it in tissues, right? Because if the light shines on it, it will give you light on different frequency that you can detect and integrate. And then I open another window simultaneously with the reference beam, and if the power goes down, I know this is a good guy. This gives me constructive interference. But if the power goes down, I know this is a bad guy, right? This is the one I don't know, because it costs me power. So what I have to do is to open and close all these windows one by one and scan the system efficiently, right? And by the time I do the whole scanning, I know which are the good guys and which are the bad guys. So after that, when the system is fully scanned, I can just open all the ones that are the good guys, and you can see I got all the beams in the phase. But because I have a phase modulator, I can do more than that. I can actually shift the bad guys a little bit forward, right, which you will see in a bit. And if I do that, now I'm just shifting the bad guys a little bit forward, and you can see they start nicely interfering constructively even with the good guys. Right? So at the end, just by playing with the phase of the beams in here, I can get a very nice signal. This is that the intensity was too high and I just burned the detector. Should be fun. Anyway, just to show you how it really works, right? It was sort of a basic introduction. This is how it really works. So somewhere in the system I have distribution of amplitude of the laser beam and phase, right? I don't know about any of these, so this is, let's say, the aberrated phase. What you see here are these sort of black and white lines. Right? And because phase is sort of like on a circle, right? Whenever the phase changes by 2 pi, I basically get the same behavior, right? So every time you see this black to white jump, it's when the phase actually made a 2 pi jump, right? And I don't need to bother with this, so I can only sort of do the modulo of the whole phase on the 2 pi interval, right? So I don't know about any of these. What I see is what happens when I send this through the lens. So here is my aberrated sort of beam, right? And I want to create a very nice one. So what I do, I apply a grating on it first. Again, you can see this 2 pi jumps in here because it's like tilted wavefront, but I just cut it into these 2 pi segments, so I have this like modulation in there, right? And I shifted the beam from the position of so-called 0 order to the position of the first order in here, and then I virtually cut the spatial light modulator into my domains, into the windows of the semaphore, if you will. And when I do that, I only apply the grating on the middle one, which again gives me a reference. And the way the reference manifested is here. I just sent a little bit of light into the position of the first order, right? And then I turn on another one, right, which will interfere with my reference and gives me a fringe because these two came into the focus on slightly different angles. And when I play the phase of that by just shifting the fringes, the grating over the domain, what my fringes do, they start moving. And when I put there the intensity detector, I detect sinusoidal functions. And what I want is a maximum. So this tells me, the maximum tells me which phase do I have to use for the tested mode in order to get the constructive interference. And then I do the same trick for all these windows and scan the system one by one, which allows me to measure the phase very nicely. But also because the interference term is given by this extremely simple equation, which is a cosine sentence, basically, I can also measure relatively the amplitude. So it's a very fancy profiler that tells me everything that I have in my system. So when I did it in the experiment, I actually got my distribution of amplitude and phase experimentally. The system is again very simple. I just take my laser beam, bounce it off the spatial light modulator, send it through a lens on CCD where only 1 pixel of the CCD is my intensity detector. Very small thing. And this allowed me to convert this initially really ugly beam into a very nice focus. And this is how I corrected my vessel beam, right? So you wouldn't be able to distinguish this from simulation. Right? And this allows me to do a lot of more fancy beam shaping. So this is an attempt to create a logo crest of the University of St. Andrews without any correction. This is how ugly it looks. This is sort of the manufacturer's correction. So they give you a file that should describe how the spatial light modulator is deformed. But the spatial light modulators, they usually suffer a lot of aging, so it changes with time. So after a couple of months, you can't really use it. So this is a solution when I use what we call the phase-only correction, when I apply the phase correction only. And this is when I actually also use the information of the amplitude. So I got something very, very good. And if you compare the details between the simulation, what I should have got, and the actual reality, you can see that they are practically identical. So it gives me a very good degree of control over the beams. Right, but the true success in this was when I did the following experiment. So here is my initially ugly beam from a laser, and when I did this trick, I could correct it to a nice point. But then I introduced a huge scattering tissue phantom. And you can see all these speckles, which is a sign of sending laser light through scattering medium. And even here, I could select a point and repeat the trick, and I could maximize the power going to the same point, which is, in a sense, what the group invented it. So I showed the application of that in optical manipulation. I was able to confine particle even through this horribly sketchy material. Right? was published in 2010 in Nature Photonics, and we describe it in sort of more accessible way in this review paper. If you want, just ask me, I can give you a copy. Right. So that was the first attempt to sort of correct for horribly scattering materials. You can go as deep as you want, it doesn't make any difference, right? Because once the beam is totally scattered and you don't have any ballistic photons, you are in this sort of highly diffusive regime. You can always correct it the same way, and you can always enhance the signal by the same amount of, by the same number as the number of segments that you use, right? But you need the probe, you need the guide star, right? Somewhere inside in situ. So imagine that you would be trying to do imaging in brain, you would have to introduce some kind of guide stars in brain, right? Fluorescent particles that are sort of isolated, right? There are some attempts to do this using ultrasound, ultrasonic radiation, and a lot of fascinating research was done in the domain, but over the years I got somehow skeptical, and I saw that doing it with totally non-invasive approaches will take a lot of years, right? So I concluded that if you have to cut in the meat, you have to do as little damage as possible. That's quite clear. And that's where the optical fibers came in. So you might be familiar with the concept of optical fibers, right? Which is now basically the heart of my research for the last few years. Optical fibers that you have, if you're lucky, you can have them at home. Then they deliver really fast internet to your home, right? And they are all single mode, right? They have very narrow core, typically a couple of micrometers, right? What I'll be talking about are multimode fibers. They are slightly thicker, right? Typically a couple of tens of micrometers, right? Still narrower than your hair, right? And the way why we use them is that they basically deliver the light with minimal losses, right? So in here, this is a concept of total internal reflection. Instead of the fiber, we have a stream of water, but because the water has higher refractive index than the air outside, the light basically bounces on the walls and always bounces under the angle of total internal reflection. So that's why the light is imprisoned in the stream, and it's with minimal losses. Transport through. So something like that is true in the multimode fibers as well, and the single mode as well, obviously. We have the core that has slightly larger refractive index than the vertical cladding, right? It is slightly lower. So because of this contrast, we can imprison the photons in. And if you send a light into multimode fiber, such as this, one end, what you get on the other side is speckles again, because the processes that guide light through are extremely complex, and they have been considered random or chaotic for a long time. And essentially, this is the same situation as passing the light through a turbine medium. Right? So, if you do the same trick that I just showed, you can convert this to a point, which essentially gives you an equivalent of an objective. Right? So, instead of bulky objective, you can use very narrow fibers that are narrower than your hair. So this is the idea. You would introduce a fiber into brain, right, of a living animal that can maybe run around and experience controlled neuronal stimuli, if you want. You can experience stuff, you can starve it, give it a female. And then observe what will happen at the cellular or subcellular level. You could see a release of new dendritic spines and associate this with the formation of memories. So this is the standard image guides that are used in endoscopy. This is how bulky they are, right? How they work, they are sort of parallel bundles of optical fibers, right, embedded in one big cladding. Well, this would be, well, how they work is that on the sort of, as you call it, distal side of the endoscope, you basically project an image, and the image is separated into the guiding channels, and then because they are all coherent, they never get mixed, you get the same image at the other side. In here, this would be the theoretical limit of this bundle. People don't do that because you will have a single mode fibers and they don't take so much light. Transmission efficiency will be very, very low, right? but it's still very bulky. But you can't put them closer to each other because the photons would start tunneling between the cores and you would lose the information. But if you could deal with this randomization, you can merge them in one multimode fiber, and this is how narrow they are, and still give you the same amount of information as this big equivalence. So that's the motivation. So already somewhere in 2009, I have done the experiments on the focusing. So you can see I'm sort of changing the point at the end of multimode fiber. Unfortunately, this was never published because I was recommended when I submitted this as a part of my first Nature Photonics paper that I should rename it. So I did that. We don't argue with the editors. But the problem was you could see that there was a lot of background behind the point, a lot of scattering light that would negatively influence with the imaging. Right? So I did a couple of changes in that, and these days I can create wonderful points without any background. Right? I can split the beam into as many beams as I want at the end of the fiber, or create any bizarre structures if you want. And I can also use it for optical manipulation. So here I have one fiber, and I'm trapping a couple of particles from the output that is reshaped in order to create me all these optical traps. And also the white light is delivered through the fiber. So basically this is a total replacement of the objective. You can have fiber-based microscopes without any complexity. The fiber costs about £2 or €3 per meter. So you only need that much to quite cool things. Right, so I should explain a little bit of maths. It's gonna get tough towards the end, right? So the competition is now not to sleep. Speaking about the fiber, you can understand it as sort of a black box, right? And you can send some light in and you get some light out. And the fiber can be described using algebra, by a matrix, right? One matrix that you basically take your input vector, you multiply it with the vector with the matrix, and you're going to get the output. We call it transmission or transformation matrix. So this is how it looks like. This is a real measurement. The color represents the phase, and the intensity represents the brightness. So in here, this is the transformation matrix in sort of representation of my semaphore windows. So how do I do that? Let's say I send my laser beam at the input of the fiber into one of these windows. Let's say it's, I don't know, number 14, right? And then it gives me this random looking signal at the output, which also can be represented as a vector. I just collect the signal on this sort of wiggly line. And then I draw this line on the say, a row number 40. And then I do it for all of these input modes, and scan the transformation matrix one mode after the other. And by the time I do that, I have a complete knowledge about what the system does. So the transformation matrix should be understood as a way how to experimentally acquire what's happening inside the fiber. Right? And with this knowledge, you can predict what will be the outcome of any field that you send in. Right? Now, pushing the light from one end to the other in a shape that you want is one thing, but imaging is quite the opposite. You have unknown field at the sort of distal end of the fiber, and from what you get on your proximal side, you have to be able to recover what was the initial field. So I've done the experiments in about 2012. How it works, it's not that complicated. But let's start from the object. So here's my sample plane in the middle. What you have on the left side is essentially a very standard microscope. If you are biologists or doctors, you will know that microscopes have objective and tube lens. What it does, the microscope objective will give you sort of Fourier transform of the image. And the tube lens then efficiently inverts the Fourier transform, and it gives you a copy of the sample field on the CCD. Right? So you have a pair of Fourier transforms that sort of cancels each other. Right? What we have on the right side is essentially the same thing. We have multimode fiber that gives me a transform. It's not Fourier transform. It's some kind of bizarre transform that is described by this transformation matrix. Right? And then I have all these optics, including spatial line modulator, in order to program it efficiently so it works just as the tube length. And when I do that, I can sort of invert the randomization of the fiber and get an image again on the CCD. Right? So pretty much the same thing. And this is a comparison. This is the microscope image, and this is the image that I could recover from the fiber. Right? You can see that the resolution is nothing special, it's quite pixelated, but it shows that it's a valid concept, it's possible to do. Right? It was the first sort of demonstration of imaging with sort of a bright field equivalent at this speed. Right? So it's passive, it doesn't require any scanning. Right? What it needs is single frequency, but it can be spatially incoherent. Right? So you can use a scattering, your rotating diffuser, as was introduced in the last talk. Right, obviously, biologists are really interested not in bright field that much, but fluorescent imaging. So I've had to redo the system for fluorescent imaging, which is relatively simple. So again, here's my sample, and you know that I can create any point as I want at the end of the fiber. I can synthesize it just by using a spatial line modulator. So what I could do is basically create a point in every place and sort of raster scan the image. Right? The problem with that is that the refresh rate of the spatial line modulator is somewhere in the order of 100 Hz. So I could only scan 100 points per second, which would take me a decent image to scan for a couple of minutes or tens of minutes, which is really slow. So I combine that with the other piece of technology, which is acoustic deflector, which is not that smart as spatial line modulator, but it can steer a beam really quickly at the range of a couple tens of kilohertz, typically 50 kilohertz you can achieve. And then, using this, I could send a beam from the acoustic deflector that is coming on my spatial line modulator under different angles. And then what I did, I programmed the spatial line modulator in such a way that under different illumination angle gives a different point on the sample. So you have a static hologram, but because you illuminate it really quickly from different angles, you can scan the point really quite quickly, efficiently. And this is how it looks like. So this is sort of a passive regime. Here are a couple of particles. And when they get, you can see the scanned, really quickly scanned points. And you don't see it scanning because it's really fast. It's a couple of tens of kilohertz. But you can see the response in here. So I should say that when you excite the fluorescence, right, you collect it backwards through the fiber, separate it here, and detect it on the photomultiplying tube. Right? So the resolution, just like this, was really weak. But I could play tricks. I could not have the SLM entirely static. But I could sort of interlace a couple of different holograms and shift the positions around and then reconstruct the image sort of numerically. So there is a trade-off between resolution and speed. You can choose what you want, right? But you know, it got somewhat decent for the relatively small things. Right. What I didn't tell you is where you need to choose your imaging plane. Right? And this actually represents one huge advantage of this technology. Is that you have a freedom to do it. You can choose your image plane in here, and this is when you basically set your calibration plane during acquiring of the transformation matrix. And if you go further, your resolution will go down, but you will get much larger field of view. It's basically like a line. The further it goes, the larger field of view you see, right? And if you go closer towards the fiber facet, you can get much reduced field of view, but much higher resolution. But the only thing that you need to do to change from one to another is to change the hologram that is outside. Right? So no mechanical components required, no zoom, no focusing stuff, just the hologram outside, which is, I think, the only technology that can do that. Now, how far we can really go? We can go very far. We can go into sort of macroscopic distances. So we started to play with this for sort of outreach into different applications. You can imagine like surveillance. It's a very expensive way of peeking through a keyhole, but you can imagine applications in surveillance of combustion engines or nuclear engines, like that. Right. So this is what we call a complex photonics modeling agency. This is me. Right. In this application, we didn't have the luxury of acoustic deflector, so you had to sit on the chair, not moving for 12 minutes. the image. But you can see that you can go really, really far with the imaging. Right. Now, there is a huge issue, right? And big issue, big criticism is that if you bend the fiber, right, the transformation matrix changes. And essentially you lose the image, right? Because you know, the randomization of the lighting fiber is different. So you could only use it in sort of static geometry. Once you bend the fiber, it's gone. And this was a reason I had some hard time publishing that. At the end, we managed to publish it in Nature Communications, which I was really happy about. But it was quite a fundamental issue, and many grounds that I tried to apply on actually failed on that point. I always argue that you don't really need a flexible instrument, at least not in the initial stage. And this is Nigel Emtich from Oxford, from the Department of Pharmacology, who studies the functionality of hippocampus, information memory. And these are some of our first experiments. This is nothing really gross. This is just dental cement holding the fiber. The fiber is actually coming through this kind of cannula, the ferrula, and it's just cemented on top of the brain of the rat. And these were some first, these are still ex vivo, but these are still some first images of the neurons, and we hope this could be the dendritic spines. At that time we had very bad electronics on the detection, so hopefully I'll get some decent images very soon. But you can see we only need this much of a fiber in static geometry to do already sample research. Now the other application, this is sort of a step aside. You may or may not heard about light sheet microscope, which is now very, very powerful and very popular device in life science imaging. It's sort of an equivalent of confocal microscope. It also gives you volumetric imaging, but instead of scanning light by sort of raster scanning the 3D scene and rejecting the light that is out of focus, you basically only illuminate your sample with a plane from the side. And then if you move the plane up and down, you sort of raster scan, you basically scan all the 3D volume, and you can reconstruct quite nicely the 3D distribution of the samples. And it's actually, I think it was named Method of the Year last year. So people fight and compete in generating better and better light sheets now, right? And better methods to implement light sheet as good as possible, using two-photon microscopy, using structured illumination and other things. This is a project that I've been only partially involved. It was an idea of my colleague and friend Tom Wettenburg, who is now in Madrid. When we both were in St. Andrews, he was still postdoc in the group of Slovakia. So you would say that maybe Bessel beam is a good candidate, right? It's a nice and narrow field, and all we need to do is just scan it, right? Make it a nice plane. But it turns out that the surrounding rings are actually quite annoying. And Tom Wettenburg actually came up with the idea of using another kind of non-diffracting beam, but it's this time curved. It's called berry beam. Berry beam is like a banana. And if you use this in combination with deconvolution, right, you can actually increase the field of view by an order of magnitude. Very nice study, published last year in Nature Methods. So just to show you the advantage, these images, all these are taken in focus, and you can use Gaussian beam, Bessel beam, or the airy beam. But if you move away from the focus, from the focal plane, the Gaussian beam degrades really quickly because of spreading, right? So you can see it's pretty fuzzy here. The Bessel beam is rubbish all the time, while the airy beam is actually very nice, even if you go really far from the focal plane. So quite an achievement. And I've been actually implementing the light sheet also with the fibers, because you can think of putting the fiber in depth, right, through a lot of tissues, and still get this quite advanced method happening. So we can create very nice light sheets at the end of the fiber. This is actually a nice demonstration. So the fiber is roughly somewhere here. Now we are at the edge. Right, so we can have a very nice light sheet scanning up and down. And if we send the light sheet in the sample, very close to a tissue, we can selectively excite layers of the specimen, and then it allows us to reconstruct very nicely the 3D distribution of the image. This time it's nuclei that we are looking at. And just to show you how powerful it is, You can also implement all these advanced methods, including structured illumination, that can possibly allow us also to increase the field of view. So just to give you a comparison, this is comparison between a Gaussian beam that is only nice in the focus, but if you go away, it blurs really quickly. Bessel beam, again, it's rubbish, but if you use the structured illumination Bessel profile, this is one of the quite new methods developed by Eric Websig. You can see that the resolution is very nice in the whole volume, and I can also show it on the living specimen. Again, we are looking at nuclei, and you can see that the blurring is basically much less pronounced in this case. So yeah, this is how far we can go without any flexibility, right? We can still say it, we can still apply the fibers with some limitations, but the problem with the flexibility was bothering me for some time. So just to give you a flavor how strong it is, this is me just playing with quite a small fiber. It only has a couple of hundred moles. So basically, if you deform the fiber, the speckle pattern changes, right? And you could say it's quite dynamic, it looks hardly predictable, right? And I can proudly announce that we actually managed to crack it up to a certain extent, and it was published in Nature Photonics just yesterday, right? So very new thing worth looking at. And in the remaining time, what is my time?
Few minutes.
Few minutes, right? I can try to quickly explain that. Okay. So not everything in the fiber is random, as we found, right? So one thing is quite cool. If you send a light under a certain angle into the fiber, it sort of bounces in the fiber under the same angle and then also leaves under the same angle. Right? So this quantity, the axial component of the K vector, the propagation vector, doesn't change. Right? And these lights don't mix with each other. Right? And it has a couple of cool applications. You can use it, for example, to convert your diffraction limited point into a donut mode, just by using this azimuthally independent modulation, because whatever is azimuthally independent works exactly the same like if the fiber was a Fourier component. Right? So you can create a donut shape, you can create a Bessel beam as well, just by filtering one of these zones, again, which is quite nice. And you can use a defocus to shift the beam in and out from the fiber, right, without any recalibration. It's also quite cool. Now, the theory says that the fibers support certain kind of special modes that I like to call propagation invariant modes in atomic beams. They are very similar, they are same acronym as these cookies, and they are even somewhat similar. Do you know these cookies? They are French, from Lut, very good. You can't get them in Britain because the market is totally dominated by Jaffa cake, but you know, you get them in Germany and France, everywhere. And these beams have this one special feature that if you take them and send them in the fiber, you should get the identical modes coming out of the fiber. Right? So they are propagation invariant. Right? And mathematically they can be described by sort of a splice of two Bessel functions. And this is how they look like. They always form a pyramid. Right? So you know, the Matrix movie could have used them, right? This is the Matrix in these modes, right? This is how it should look like. Anyway, this is essentially the true amount of the modes that we are dealing with in our system. There's quite a lot of them. It's pretty complex stuff. This is when we use IR wavelengths. This is when we use visible. So we get basically, you know, in the order of thousands of these modes to play with. It's quite demanding. So in order to track the flexibility, I made a new geometry that allows me essentially to send any optical field in any polarization state, in any amplitude state, with any kind of phase modulation, and also analyze the field in both polarization states and also interfere it with the reference signal in order to get the phase. So I know any signals coming in and I know any signals coming out, which was the important thing. And when I took my transformation matrix using the measurement, right, of the response of the fiber, once I have it in my computer, right, I can emulate any kind of behavior. So if I send in virtually my computer any of these fields into the fiber, I should get the same one. Right? Now, if you apply a little bit of algebra, you would find that if you want to do the same thing for all the modes simultaneously, it's essentially converting your transformation matrix from the representation of these semaphore doors into the pins, right? So mathematically, you basically take your matrix and you multiply from left and from right by sort of a conversion matrix in which each of these modes is represented as a vector of these pins. So now, if you send one in, right, you should get the same one out. And if you remember, for example, from quantum physics, sorry, not the biologists, if you do that, if you express the transformation matrix in the space of its eigenvectors, which is essentially propagation current modes, you should get a diagonal matrix, right? Because you send one mode in and you receive the same mode out, right? But what we got instead was this. It was sort of diagonal, but not quite it, right? And the problem was misalignment. So if you consider how complex it is, you have a fiber that you have to align in X, Y, and Z, and two tilts, and one defocus. Right? So you have 6 degrees of freedom on both sides of the fiber. So you have 12 degrees of freedom. There is no PhD student that can align that, I can guarantee. It's impossible, right? Because it would take a couple of, I think, times of the duration of the universe to do that. So the solution is take the data and try to find this misalignment numerically in the computer, right? So I developed an optimization procedure, a quite fast computer that takes about 2 hours to converge. And it basically tries to implement all these misalignment possibilities, and essentially it finds that there is a match, that you can get these misalignment parameters, the 12 degrees of that, and get very nice transformation matrix. So I will skip a couple of other slides. We've actually studied polarization as well. The polarization has a quite crucial effect. And the take-home message is that if you use circularly polarized modes, they remain still propagation invariant. And with that, we could actually do the experiment in the hard layer way. So this is an example how it looks like. So this is what we are sending in, and this is what we are receiving out. Right? I'm showing also one slightly larger 500 millimeters. And you can see that they are really very, very similar. So we actually found the misalignment for which it works. And now, with this, we had to study the phases. The phases are a really important thing to consider, right? Because if you don't predict the phases of the modes, you don't have anything, right? This is really crucial. And how complex it is can be shown by this movie from Glasgow Science Centre. Right? Each of the modes has a slightly different way how to oscillate. Sort of box in slightly different rhythm. And because it's about 1 micrometer when it does the step, right? By the time it gets to, say, 10 centimeters of the fiber, they are totally out of the phase. Right? It's basically like predicting this for a week in advance.